Or when I asked you, Barry Goldwater, he's there, but he's not as Bobby Ray Inman. Okay, so Bobby Ray Inman has more influence than he does.
Oh, way more.
Then I went to President Clinton, and you said, no, George H.W. Bush Sr. has more influence than he does. Great.
Did. He's passed away.
He's dead. He's passed away. Did. Then I asked you about Kissinger. No, then you said Dick Cheney was more powerful than Senior. Okay. Then I asked you Kissinger. You said, no, Kissinger was more in that community of that influence.
And very global with it. And,
for sure. I mean, yeah, and he had a very interesting reputation. Yep. Fascinating guy to study, by the way. Some of the things he said. Yeah. He said the illegal we can do fast. The unconstitutional takes a while. Said something like that.
He did. It's actually in our archive, that quote. Yeah. He said, the illegal we can do immediately.
Yeah, no problem.
Unconstitutional takes a little longer.
Interesting guy. Very interesting guy. Womanizer, playboy, liked at one point, sexiest man, I think, in 1972. All this stuff that you read about him. Interesting guy. Okay. So then go up above that. Who do you know that you will put even above Kissinger from the last 70 years that we would know about?
A name you would know. Right off the top of my head, I can't think of one. Certainly, some of the corporate folks that nobody would think of.
Tillerson?
Would be very powerful. Jack Welch of General Electric.
Jack Welch you would put ahead of?
Very high up. Now, at a certain point, it's not a pecking order. They collaborate, and I think what I understand, that committee collaborates, and it sort of squabbles. But, when I was first told about it, back in the early days, you used to talk about, there were these documents that got released called the Majestic 12, MJ12. And nobody knows if they're authentic or not. I think they are largely authentic. But what's not in dispute is this NRO document from the 90s, and one of the compartment operations is MAJI, MAGI, or sometimes you'll see MAJIC, and it stands for the Majority Joint Intelligence Committee. And that is the group that is a joint entity on the U.S. end of this that deals with this subject. And that is in the document. You can pull it up. It's the National Reconnaissance Office document, Nellis Air Force Base, 1991.
So you pull up Majestic 12, Rob. I just want to read. Is this Majestic 12? Also known as Magic 12, is a purported organization that represents UFO conspiracy theories. The organizations claim to be the code name of an alleged secret committee of scientists, military leaders, and government officials formed in 1947 by an executive order by President Harry Truman to facilitate recovery and investigation of alien spaceships, spacecrafts. The concept originated in a series of supposedly leaked secret government documents first circulated by ufologists in 1984.
Right.
Upon examination, the Federal Bureau FBI declared the documents to be complete bogus, and many ufologists considered them to be elaborate hoax. Majestic 12 remains popular among some UFO conspiracy theories, and the concept has appeared in popular culture, including television, film, and literature.
Here's what I think actually happened. If you want to hide something, you hide it in plain sight. So a great deal of information in those documents is true, but the way they came about was a hoax. So if you're involved with counterintelligence and information's coming out, you want to divert people to something that's the provenance is going to be a problem. And that way it takes them down. The National Security Agency guy described it to me this way. He was the right hand to General Odom back in the day, who was the director of the NSA. And he said, we call this a DDT operation. You set up a decoy, you distract people, and then you trash them. And so by releasing things that are of questionable provenance, then you sort of put it out there, and much of the information may be correct, but because the provenance is bogus, it takes the information down with it. So one of the things that's very complicated is understanding how counterintelligence and disinformation works on this. It's Byzantine, it's complicated, it takes a lot to unravel it. And that's why I tend to be very careful with both witnesses and documents if I don't have a good provenance for it. That is something that's hard to do. when you're trying to run an operation like we do without any real clearance. I mean, you have to rely on people and their credibility and what documentation they can prove. And I think what's most important, the reason I'm releasing this archive, is that if you go through it carefully, you see where the dots all connect. But these intelligence briefings we're working on, the modules, we call these intelligence modules, when those get put in, it's going to connect all these dots. And that's a big undertaking that we're working on right now.
Jamie Dimon, where do you put him? Is Jamie Dimon a person all the way at the top or not really?
I wouldn't know. I don't know anything about him.
You don't know anything about Jamie Dimon?
I have no information on
Elon, what do you think about Elon Musk? And what role, is he like a Nikola Tesla? Is he a good guy in your eyes? Is he somebody that, the establishment can't stand? Is he someone they can't control?
Well, I think that certainly if he was inclined to research this end of it, he wouldn't be making I call it a fake Tesla. I mean, a real Tesla car wouldn't have to be plugged in. It most certainly wouldn't have 900 and some pounds of lithium-ion batteries. It would be an electromagnetic generator. If you look at this archive, we have this whole account of this inventor named Floyd Sweet. He had something the size a little bit bigger than a cigarette pack. And this was back in the 80s. And we have all the documentation on this. Huge files on it. And it was running a 300 horsepower motor that could run your car. And it never had to be plugged in. I think the battery started up with some very tiny battery, And once that circuit started, it was pulling energy out of what's called the quantum vacuum. Some people call it the 0-point energy field. But let's describe what that is. You see your tea glass there, that mug.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of potential energy in the space in that mug is enough energy to boil off all the oceans of the Earth. It's been quantified. And that's called the 0-point energy field. So if you understand the physics of these very high voltage, VHV we call them, very high voltage systems, where it may be millions of volts, but at very low power, but at certain cycles per second, certain frequencies, you can tap into that. Depends on what material you're using.
Explain 0-point energy to the average person.
Well, so visualize just the space around you.
Mm-hmm.
And everything around you, if you get down to, by classic definition, it's the energy left after even all subatomic particles have been brought down to minus 270 some degrees Kelvin. But there's still this energy field. That's the baseline energy field that all of matter, space, time, subatomic particles are fluxing in and out of. And interestingly, the early Lockheed man-made UFOs were called flux liners because they were tapping into that energy field, the quantum flux. So that's basically it. And it's huge. I mean, I think Nikola Tesla called it the infinite energy field. And Professor Dirac, and modestly called it the Dirac Sea. But a scientist named Dr. Casimir, Casimer, back in the 30s postulated this, but then proved its existence in the 50s, another important date. And that's called the Casimir effect. The scientific information on that is also in this intelligence archive. So, I wasn't even born when Professor Casimir proved the existence. Now, what's debated amongst scientists currently is that you can tap into it from a practical point of view. But you can. And the proof is, you know what the proof is? Look at one of those UFOs moving. No jets, no rockets, no internal combustion engines, no nuclear, no heat signature. In fact, when you get those things operational, temperature actually goes down. If you're in a hangar with 2 or 3 of these things hovering, like we have the pictures in our archive of what's called the ARB there at the Norton Air Force Base in 1988, it actually is like an air conditioning. It cooled it down. So not only do you not have heat coming off of it, it actually pulls temperature down somewhat. And so there's so many applications of these sciences. I mean, think about it. It'd be free energy, refrigeration, cooling server farms, if you're concerned about climate change for whatever reason. But even people who don't think there's climate change due to pollution, there's 5+ million people a year die from particles, from emissions. coal and gas and oil, and not to mention radiation causing cancer from nuclear. And all of that would be replaced. See, I mean, all that's gone. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is you're stepping on the toes of hundreds of trillions of dollars in assets. Not just the market cap of these big corporations, but the commodities. Think of what's traded on the Chicago Board of Trade, just in futures and commodity trading. It's trillions. So all of that, you're not trading commodities anymore.
I'm surprised you're not studying much of Jamie Dimon or Larry Fink or BlackRock or some of these guys, because who is funding all these programs? Where are they getting the money from?
Oh, yeah. Well, Goldman Sachs and BlackRock definitely have involvement with these operations. And, the more current people who are involved, the more it's shadowy. But when people get older or pass away, then they start talking. Let me give you a great example. After World War II, at the end of the war, there was a man named Paul Mellon, who was, the Mellon Carnegie, the Mellon family, one of the few billionaires in the world at the end of World War II. His grandson has worked with me, who was also a senator, John Warner's son. And Senator John Warner was like a lower level operative on this majority, yes. And so Paul Mellon, he went over and at the end of World War II with General Patton and Allen Dulles, and they confiscated this disk that was an early attempt to make an electromagnetic anti-gravity thing. It wasn't fully operational, but they brought it back to the United States. And how do we know this? Because towards the end of his life, Paul Mellon, who was very instrumental with Allen Dulles in forming the CIA and all that stuff. Remember, the OSS became the CIA, the OSS during World War II. And when he was getting older, he had a couple martinis and told his grandson, John Warner IV, that in fact he had gone over there and brought this thing back, and that it was not one of the jet rocket thrusters, it was electromagnetic and anti-gravity. And so, I mean, that we're talking now the end of World War II in Germany in 1945. So that is something. What you find is that as some of these folks get older, before they meet their maker, as it were, they start telling things to me or to other